Alright everyone, so here are the patch notes for Teamfight Tactics, patch 12.1. It has been 4 weeks since we've had a major patch, so we got blasted a big one. I assume this is out tomorrow. Usually that's how the timeline works. Depends on where you are in the world. But for me, this should end up sometime midday tomorrow. Alright, let's go through. There's a bunch of large changes, starting with augments. So they're rebalancing all the hearts in Crest. So some of them either didn't give you a champion before, or some of them are rebalancing by giving you a different champion. So for example, Arcanist Heart now gets you a Swain. Swain's actually a very good champion. Doesn't see much play though. Challenger Heart instead of a Warwick, you now get a Quinn. Protector Heart no longer gives you a Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank's just too strong to be giving away for free, especially with Protector Heart. Scholar Heart instead of a Lysandra gives you a Zz'Rot because Lysandra was too strong. Scrap Heart gives you a Blitzcrank instead of an Echo. I have issues with this one because it's the same issue that I have with Protector giving a Blitzcrank, but Protector giving a Blitzcrank probably isn't as bad as this. That said, Echo is like a ridiculous utility champion, so like this is actually still a nerf. It's just I don't know if it's the right nerf. Twin Shot Heart now gives you a cog. It's fine. Assassin Crest no longer gives you an Echo. Same thing here. Echo is too strong to be just giving away for free. Arcanist Crest now gives you a Swain. Yeah, this one probably Arcanist probably did need it. Arcanist is in such a weird spot in the game because there's not like a really great early game to play with Arcanist. Like it's hard to linearly play Arcanist. The early game carry you really only have is Twisted Fate. Um, Otherwise, you're going to be doing a pretty wicked transition to get with a Vex frontline. It's just awkward. Challenger Crest, Quinn, Chemtech Crest, Warwick. Yeah, Zach is a very, very good frontline champion, so this one's not surprising. What you're going to find is a lot of the ones that were giving a 3 cost were probably too strong because all the 3 costs are actually really good for the most part. So they're nerfing a lot of those, bringing them down to a 2 cost. Imperial Quest now gives you a Swain. I don't know about this one. I mean, Imperial Crest in general is pretty blah. It's not very impressive, but having a Talon probably isn't very useful on Imperial anyway. That said, no one really knows what a good Imperial composition looks like, so. Mutant Crest no longer gives you a Cogmop. Mutant Crest on its own is pretty good. Scrap Crest, Blitzcrank, yeah, same deal. Ardent Sensor gives that's the attack speed buff for enchanters. So I think this is the one where enchanters heal. They give an attack speed buff to things. Yeah, this is actually kind of good. I just don't think anyone uses it. There's usually better things to play, and not every game you're actually going to have enchanters in, where your comp just doesn't fit 2 to 3 enchanters in it very easily. Ascension damage amplifier goes down to 50%. So if you didn't know, Ascension was cracked. Especially in the current game, or at least this set, where battles tend to go on forever and never end. So Ascension triggered in probably 50% of your battles at least. And having this much damage amplification is insane. I believe this was at 70 before. It was insane. Cybernetic health bonus has been nerfed a little. I never messed with this one, so I honestly don't know how good this is. Duet bonus, yeah, this was pretty good. Like 500 health's a lot of health to give the 2 different units. Lifelong learning has now been reworked. So this is actually new. They on their patch notes video, Mort didn't talk about this one. So I'm assuming this is new from the time they posted up that video. Now guaranteed grants Scholar 2 ability power after each combat and an additional 2 ability power if they survive combat. This one's a little interesting. Scholar in general is kind of just a throwaway trait. You're not going to like actively stack a bunch of scholars. That doesn't mean it's a bad trait. In fact, it's actually still a pretty good trait. But you're not going to carry scholars. You're just going to play a bunch of them in a pretty standard comp. It's not like Scholar is what you circle in the comp. But this is a little more interesting. This actually could be kind of useful, but only if you have a Scholar that's going to get a lot of advantage out of it. And what I mean when I say that is, oh shoot, I forgot her name. The 4-cost Scholar. Name escapes me, whatever. Don't care anymore. She's probably the one that's most suited to be a carry and start getting these buffs. But the problem is she's a 4-cost. So you have to find her early while you have this trait. Having this augment early is probably not particularly good because a lot of the early Scholars are not particularly good. But in the late game, you're often just going to have like 2 to 3 Scholars just kind of lying around. But like I said, not many of them are really fit to get this bonus, with the exception of Seraphine. I believe Seraphine's a Scholar. I think Seraphine's a Scholar. I honestly don't remember. It's been so long since I played. I feel bad about that. Makeshift armor getting buffed. No one likes makeshift armor. No one wants to play makeshift armor. I think part of the problem with makeshift armor is that in this particular meta, people are slamming defensive items. And if you're slamming defensive items, you don't really need this at all. There's not a lot of advantage to taking makeshift armor when one of your first 2 items you slam is a Bramble, Dragon's Claw, Warmog, so on and so forth. Otherwise, this would be a good augment, just not in the current meta. And I think if they continue to nerf defensive items the way a few of them have this set, don't be surprised if makeshift armor actually becomes pretty good. Death's Defiance now has... Portable Forge is in a weird place. I don't know if they talk about it later in this, but we'll talk about it if they do talk about it. Spellblade Empowered Ability gets a buff. So I think there's a general thought amongst both the community and based off what Riot Mordog has said about this, there is probably a Spellblade comp out there that nobody knows of that is completely busted, but nobody knows it. Nobody knows how to play it. No one knows what it looks like. I think he's probably right. I do. These numbers here are absurd. Absolutely absurd. But I don't know what the comp looks like. I don't think no one knows what the comp looks like. No one knows how to play it. No one knows how to itemize it. So until somebody actually does the work to figure out how to play Spellblade, no one's going to use it. It's probably the hardest augment to really understand and figure out how to play. Because I imagine you have to completely change your style the moment you pick it up. Like, if you're going to, like, Arcanist, and then just, like, you're like, oh, I have this completely different ability set here that I have to play around. Sand United. So, my understanding was they were originally going to nerf this back to 2, 3, 4. But they decided to keep 5 on the Prismatic, which I think is correct. The big thing here was at 3. This was kind of cracked. I, like, destroyed a handful of games when this was at 3. Like, it was actually kind of wild how powerful Stand United could be. And it's not really that hard to run 2-sums and 3-sums of nearly every trait in the set. It really isn't. Especially when you, like, I play a lot of Chemtech, Urgot. Like, that comp just thrives on playing 2-sums of nearly everything. You run 2 brawlers. You usually run 4 brawlers. You run 4 brawlers. You have 5 Chemtech. You have 2 Scholar. You have 2 Enforcer. You have 2 Scrap. You have 2. You just end up with so many 2-sums and 3-sum compositions. And it just stacks up so hard on a champion like Urgot, who benefits amazingly from these attack damage buffs. Sunfire board, max health burn, down to 16%. I think they nerfed Sunfire, Cape, and Morello, so I'll talk about it more there, why they did that. And Placebo buffed the Woodland Charm. Woodland Charm is fine, it just tails off at the late game. Trait changes. Chemtech. So Chemtech damage resistance is going from 25 to 20. Fair change. Fair change. I think this is a lot of part of the reason why Mundo is actually kind of one of the best frontline champions in the game that very few people are really using. Because he really is. He just never dies if you have a good brawler count and a good Chemtech count. At the same time, they're going to buff the max regen. Not across the board because they don't want to buff Chemtech 3 too much. But they'll buff up the rest of them. Meanwhile, attack speed at 3 gets nerfed, while attack speed at 7 and 9 gets buffed. Yeah, the general thing here is that Chemtech 3 is really easy to play and is kind of good because most of the champions that get Chemtech tend to play near the front line. So they soak up a bunch of damage that you just heal up and reduce. Imperial. No one plays Imperial, so we're buffing. They buffed Imperial. Imperial just isn't very good. There's no easy way to play it. I think the bigger issue is Colossus, and Colossus being very awkward to play around, because if it wasn't, then Scion would be much easier to fit into Imperial comps. I think the moment Scion becomes easier to play, Imperial comps will probably open up. Because then you can put him in the front line, you can put Galio in the front line, and have a 2 Colossus front line, and then run a Samira carry with Imperial and just Tyrant her out the wazoo. I think that's probably what Imperial is supposed to look like. But right now it's not, because Colossus is just kind of balanced in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense right now. And Riot has said so much about the Colossus units that their scaling doesn't really make sense, and that they're probably going to end up looking back at that. But in general, Imperial just doesn't. No one plays it, and changing these numbers probably doesn't change that. Innovator. So they're buffing up Innovator 5. That's fair. Most people just play Innovator 3. Innovator is not like the busted ass comp it was before, so it's pretty open to seeing these changes now. This is probably right here the biggest change in the patch, I think. Socialite 2 mana regen rate is going from 5 to 3. Yeah, this is almost certainly the biggest change in the patch. 5 was way too much, and it made champions like Kai'Sa just do so much damage over such short periods of time. It got champions that were just ulting far more than they were intended to be ulting, and that was problematic. So this going down to 3 is probably the biggest change, and is probably a nerf to like everything that isn't Socialite, but was a really good carry on a Socialite hex anywhere on the playing field. That's kind of one of the things that you need to take away about Socialite. Socialite in particular is really good when you have a carry that's positioning doesn't really matter, or you have a good hex. What this usually translates to is the position doesn't really matter. So no matter where the Socialite hex is, that champion can just easily be placed there and be perfectly fine. No one cares. So a champion in particular like Kai'Sa could take crazy advantage of this. Assassin champions like Akali could take great advantage of this. You kind of get the idea here. Syndicate 7 bonus amplification goes from 33 to 50. I believe this is the health regen. I think this is just the health regen. I don't think this covers anything else but the health regen. But don't quote me on that. Yeah, I think, air quotes, this is just the health regen. Syndicate 7 is funky. Sometimes you'll get Syndicate 7 and you just free win the game, and then sometimes you'll get it and you'll have an even better comp than the one you free won, and you like go 5th. And it's like, okay, that was awkward. There's something going on with Syndicate that I don't quite understand, and I think a lot of it has to do with Shaco balancing. I think Shaco, for some reason, Shaco just feels really weak to me for some reason. And I don't really understand why, because he's not really that different from times where he was kind of crazy. It might just be that health pools are lower. It might just be that GA isn't as good. It might just be that IE isn't as good on him. I don't really know. But, Syndicate's weird. Yordles. So, long story short here, finding a 3-cost Yordle off the Yordle drop is pretty powerful. It is one of the best things that can happen to you when you're playing Yordles, is to get that easy 3-cost Yordle. It allows you to easily turn on Yordles. It allows you to faster get 6 Yordles if you wanted to play 6 Yordles. But this isn't strictly a nerf to the standard play of Yordles. The reason why I say that is because the increase in 1 cost makes you get your 1 cost 3-star faster. So in the early game, when you hit your 3-star 1 cost Yordle, that means all you can find is the 2 cost and 3 cost. So you increase your chances of finding them at a faster rate because you hit all of the 1 cost. Essentially what this means is that the overarching eco is lower, but you should, air quotes, should be able to hit Yordle 6 a lot faster, I think. Probably, I shouldn't say a lot faster, maybe 2 rounds faster. 2 to 3 rounds faster. Just because you were able to hit the 3 cost and pull, or 3-star and get those out of the Yordle pool early. Alright, champion changes. Caitlyn, this probably was unnecessary, but I think this had to do more. This was a balance change I think they put in, like, really early. This is a 3-star damage reduction. It should do a shitload of damage, but I can understand why they thought this was too much, but it really doesn't matter. I don't think so. Swain. Swain is actually getting a buff here, which is interesting, because I think actually Swain is pretty good. Just didn't really have a home when Vex got crushed with a nerf. So, I would have thought Swain was already okay. But we'll see. Because Heimerdinger range increase. This one is spicy. If the Socialite change was the biggest change on this patch, this is probably the second biggest change. Heimer does a lot of damage. Heimer also tends to walk into things and die. He won't do that anymore because he has 4 range. This change is probably the most interesting change on the patch, if it's not the most important. So I'm not quite sure how to evaluate it exactly, outside the fact I would assume that Innovator openers with Heimer are going to be pretty good. If I recall correctly, he's Yordle, Scholar, Innovator. He might not be Scholar. I believe he's Innovator, though. He also can, like, carry all of your Arcanist carry items, so he's a good AP carry in the early game, despite not even being an Arcanist. So, this one's kind of spicy, and I kind of am interested in see where this heads off to. Malzahar, they're reducing the 1-star damage and buffing the 3-star damage. Malzahar is weird. I don't like how Malzahar is basically designed to do a lot of damage, and because he does a lot of damage, people give him Gunblade because he's front to back. He doesn't attack backline. He attacks frontline first. So because of that, they gave him a lot of damage. So people put Gunblade on him, and he just heals up the front line because it's so much damage. That's pretty much why we're seeing these numbers get dropped here. This, it's probably more of a placebo because a lot of people don't actually 3-star Malzahar outside of Mutant. So you rarely see Malzahar as the actual carry of a composition. You just see him with Gunblade making the front line invincible. Tier 4 champions. Seraphine is getting a max mana buff, and her damage and healing are getting buffed. I'll probably go. We'll go into this when we talk about Sunfire, Cape, and Morello, but this is more of a balance to the fact of how good she was with Morello. Overall, this probably will not change her too much, but theoretically she could be a carry. She does do enough damage to be a carry. Like, I should be clear on that. She actually does plenty of damage and healing, I should say. But this is more of a balancing thing with the fact that she was a really good Morello holder, and now Morello got nerfed, and we'll talk about that later. Urgot Purge now counts as a basic auto attack every third shot instead of every second shot. Yeah, Shiv and Hurricane were basically must-have items on Urgot. I'm going to be honest, even with this change, they're probably still must-have items on Urgot. But it does make Deathblade probably a little bit more optimal. Not the most optimal. Like I said, I still think Hurricane is going to be the most optimal. But it does make Deathblade a little higher on the tier list. Probably, maybe even with Hurricane. We'll see. Galio. We're nerfing the Galio crit strike damage again. Clapio's pretty good. Like, if you haven't messed with Clapio, is pretty good. They're also buffing the one cost Galio is kind of meh. So they're buffing the stun duration. That's a fair change. He kind of is pretty meh. It's really, like I said before, it's an issue with Colossus. One star Colossus are kind of not worth playing. But if you get the 2-star Galio, he becomes Clapio when you give him an IE. Kaisa health revert. So the damage per missile for Kaisa is going down, and her starting mana is going down. Oh, yeah. I think with some of the other changes that are being made, this is kind of a placebo nerf that's just going to make everyone not play Kaisa. I don't like this. This kind of feels over the top, especially like these damage nerfs. Like this 80 to 70 feels way too excessive for 1-star Kaisa. I think this could have easily been 75. Now the 100 to 90 I can understand, but the 80 to 70 feels too much to me. The starting mana nerf is fine. Interestingly enough, the starting mana nerf is actually kind of a buff because it makes her first ult do a lot more damage because of how she functions with her ult, in that it does more damage the more auto attack she does. Just kind of pointing that out for people. Tom Kench Devour damage reduction from 40 to 30. It's 40%. It was obscene. Like Tom Kench could carry fights. It's actually kind of crazy how good Tom Kench actually is. Tom Kench 3 stars while now getting 20 times its usual stats when it fed an ally. Yeah, so this is kind of an issue that's happened with non-AoE 5-cost champions, where these champions can only like take out one unit at a time. Also known as the Lee Sin issue. 3-star Lee Sin didn't do anything until they made it so that his punches hit everything on the board. So, in Tom Kench's case, they're just going to make you get infinity stats if you 3-star Tom Kench. It'll be funny. I'll enjoy it. Alright, item changes. So, Guardian Angel health on revive is going from 400 to 250. So, the biggest advantage of Guardian Angel, as stated here, is the built-in aggro drop. Like, that's easily the biggest point of Guardian Angel. But I don't think this really gets at what people have an issue with Guardian Angel on, and that's how Guardian Angel interacts with some ults. Where when a champion is in GA state, its ult is still, some champions, not all champions, but some champions' ult is still going off. The most notable examples of this when we get down to bug fixes is Kaisa and Yone. Yone is probably the most noticeable one, but Kaisa's been the biggest pain on this particular patch. While they're in GA state, their ults are still wailing on people. And it's not exactly fun or interesting to most people. So the plan to balance this was to reduce health. I don't think anyone is overly pleased by this change. And I'm curious to know where Riot goes from here on what they're going to do with GA. We'll just have to wait and see. Morello burn is going from 2.5 to 2% per second. Morello is really good, and there's a lot of champions that are absolutely insane Morello holders between Seraphine, Lissandra, Kaisa. Who else is nutty? Those three in particular are absolutely absurd Morello holders. And fights in this set last forever. They never end. So to see this nerf come down is not unexpected. In fact, it's pretty expected. It is probably right. I wouldn't even be surprised to see if this number goes even lower in the future. That's just how good Morello is in this set, and like it's often kind of a must-have item if you plan on winning lobbies right now. Sunfire Cape's kind of the same, but Sunfire Cape is not as good an item in general. So they're going to give it the same nerf to keep the logic in check, but to kind of buff it because just to keep this consistency, but still make it not as bad. Increasing the proc rate. So it procs every 2 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds, which I think is a good change. Rapid Fire Cannon. Rapid Fire Cannon's attack speed is going from 50% to 60%. Anytime I read these numbers on Rapid Fire Cannon, I'm always kind of in awe that we have not broken this item yet. That said, this set I don't think has really great RFC holders. I think most of the champions that would use RFC have better items that they need to have. So like it's a good Shaco item, but Shaco needs to have IE, and GA is just as good. Yone needs GA, wants IE. Urgot doesn't really need Rapid Fire Cannon, and it doesn't do him a lot of good on his ult. Like, you're kind of getting the idea. Rapid Fire Cannon is nice and all, but it's kind of just like, I don't really need this. There's just not really a champion that I think benefits greatly from Rapid Fire Cannon. That said, it's a lot of attack speed. It's a lot of attack speed. When we find champions that are going to like go nuts with this, we're going to have some issues here. Don't be surprised if no one uses this item this set, and then next set RFC is just everywhere. That's how ridiculous these numbers are to me. Zz'Rot. So Zz'Rot is actually one of the best early items in the game, and then it falls off a cliff. So they're buffing it at all the stages outside of stage 2. It's a good change. It's incredibly good in the early game, which gives it a good use, but it just falls off a cliff so hard that you never even want to make it in the early game, despite it's one of the best early game items. Alright, small changes. Shrug It Off max health regeneration is being buffed. I don't know why. This is actually obscene on, like, 4 Brawler frontlines. I don't know. This makes Urgot unkillable. I don't really... Especially if you don't have a Morello. Smoke Bomb now works. I don't really... It now works. This is an interesting one. Sunfire, Board, and Weak Spot are no longer mutually exclusive. I didn't realize. I didn't think about that. Why that they would be mutually exclusive. So after they destroyed Metamorphosis, they're bringing it back. I think this makes Metamorphosis playable. This is not playable. This is not playable. This might be playable. Champion changes. So after they blew up Protector, Garen had no home. So they're giving him a gigantic AD buff. It's an interesting change. I don't quite know how it's going to play out. Because he's kind of like your frontline defensive unit, but they've given him this huge AD buff, so maybe he can frontline carry. I honestly don't know. It's weird. It's an odd change. Graves is getting kind of a nerf and buff. It's more of a rebalance. So he starts with less mana, but he has a lower max mana. I actually think Graves is pretty good. But like he's not overly useful in the late game because his trading is very awkward. Academy is not something people actively play. So and that's kind of where he would trait bot. He wouldn't trait bot with Twin Shot because no one plays Twin Shot 4, nor really should they play Twin Shot 4. And with Twin Shot 2, you have Gang playing Jinx and Urgot, who are all infinitely better. Like, you're just always going to play two of those three. So, I, I think he's better. I just don't know what else they could do to make him more better because Academy is kind of whack right now. Yoli, buff. Is this buffs across the board? Nah, buffs across the board on damage, and a healing buff at 3-star. I think Ioli is actually like one of the worst champions in the game, if I recall correctly. She scales incredibly poorly. Worst scaling champion in the game right now. But she's not like awful in the early game, just not like great. I usually kind of just use her as a trait bot for Brawler 4 early in the game. Kassadin, we're still nerfing Kassadin. I have nothing else to say about that. Twisted Fate is getting a buff. This is a long time in waiting. Like I said about Arcanist carries in the early game and good AP carries in the early game, there really aren't any. There's like no one that really screams put AP items on me early and I will carry the game for you. That should probably be Twisted Fate. But his damage was kind of too low. So I am quite happy to see him getting these buffs. And these numbers feel right to me as well. Karma Barrage damage is coming a flat 8%. More dogs talked about this for ages. I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. But I'm fine with it. Talon attack speed buff. Talon is funky. Like, he seems like he's really... I was surprised when I saw this buff, because Talon really isn't that bad. But I understand, like, people not playing him in the late game, because he's not, like... There's just better things to play in the late game. Zilean's slow damage has been increased. I don't know why they did this. I got nothing. I think Zilean is actually pretty good in the early game and in the mid game. As, like, a trait bot and a utility for this slow duration. And 4 seconds is a long time. Like this one I think is pretty questionable. Echo is getting a damage buff. Why? I don't know. He provides so much utility in the game already. I don't really understand why he got a buff. Lissandra is getting a buff because of Morello. This is a Morello change because she was one of the better Morello holders. So because Morello is getting nerfed, they wanted to buff her, which is a fair change. Samira getting a health buff. I actually think this is a pretty good change. I think there were other changes that they were going to make with Samira that they decided to hold off on to increase her damage. But I think what she needed more of was more health. I think health makes her a lot better in general. She's less likely to like get popped out because you have to position her kind of interestingly. Like you don't frontline her, but you don't backline her. So you just kind of put her in the middle, and she eats a lot of AOE from frontliners. So the extra health is pretty helpful. I'm curious if in the future they're going to actually go through with the damage changes they make, because Samira should be a 3-cost carry. Like, in one of the premier 3-cost carries. Same thing with Shaco, in my opinion. Those two, like, should be a lot better than I think they are right now. Now, Samira shouldn't be the ridiculous carry she was a few patches ago, but she should be one of the premier carries. At 3 cost. Vex health boost, yeah, needed. Orianna is getting mana buff. I don't know how to feel about this. Like, Orianna is interesting. Her targeting is kind of whack sometimes, but when it works, it tends to kind of be ridiculous. So, and I believe they've talked about trying to make Orianna more of a carry. I don't know. Maybe they're going that direction with this change. I just kind of view her more of a CC and shield bot. Zion's stun duration increased at 1 star along with his damage. Like I said, Colossus scaling is a little off, and playing any of them at 1 star just is wrong in nearly every situation. Yone's getting health nerfed. Yeah, he has a lot of health. I was never quite sure why he had this much health. So to see him go down to 900 feels probably right. It was likely because he was a frontline, but everyone puts GA on him, and so it's just really annoying to try to kill him. He tends to have like a Bloodthirster or a GA. It's just annoying. Victor max mana buff. Ooh. Don't know how to feel about this. So, my personal problem with Victor is that he's impossible. He's nearly impossible to play around. If your opponent positions him anywhere near the back middle, like, it feels like there's nothing you can do to stop him from ulting and clearing out half your board. And it super feels bad, man. So, I'm not sure how I feel about this mana buff. I feel like if Victor was easier to play around, it would be fine. But he's just so hard to outposition because you don't. It's really hard to logically work out where he's going to ult. If it was more understood how his ult pattern worked, I'd feel better about playing with Victor in the meta. But right now, I just don't like Victor. I find him way too hard to play around. Meanwhile, Chalice is getting a ability power buff, and Static for some reason is getting an attack speed nerf. I suspect this is because Static is actually not terrible. Well, obviously it's not terrible if they're nerfing it, but even as an early game slam, when you put it on a Ezreal, it's a pretty good item. It allows Ezreal to do a ton of damage, plus giving him the attack speed boost. Hyper roll changes. Zz'Rot, so they buffed Zz'Rot before, so they're buffing it here as well. Bug fixes. Anything notable? Go through some of these. Don't think there is anything too much here. Oh, this one. Yeah. So, they had put in a nerf to Jace on melee Jace because melee Jace was a little too good. So they put a nerf in, but that nerf never actually went through. But it really didn't impact meta at all, so they're just going to keep it this now. So this didn't happen. Alright, so that's it for the patch notes. Kind of my view is that this should tamper down some of the bigger comps, but doesn't really buff up a lot of the other comps. So, like, the biggest change on here, in my opinion, are probably these two here. So, Kai'Sa got nerfed all over the place. I'm not even quite sure how playable Kai'Sa is anymore. Meanwhile, Urgot's Hurricane nerf makes him a lot worse, I think. He's not terrible, and the Urgot comps are still really good, but you just don't slam Hurricane anymore. If you slam Hurricane, I just assumed you were going Urgot. But now you probably think twice about slamming Hurricane, because it's just not nearly as good. It's still not a bad item to slam, it's not optimal. Also, the Morello change makes healing good. Well, actually, I shouldn't put it like that. The Morello change makes, like, stall comps better. Not that much better, but better. Morello still serves its place as anti-heal, which there is a lot of in this set. So it's not like Morello is going to disappear on everyone. I think that's probably about it. There really isn't that much to talk. Despite there being a lot of changes, I don't think the meta is going to be ridiculous. The only thing I would keep an eye out is some of the Innovator stuff. A lot of the Innovators kind of got touched up in a way that I think makes a lot of the Innovators better. So keep an eye out on, like, Innovator openers and Innovator 5 in particular. I think they will be much, much better than they have been for this current patch. Not up to the levels where they were busted like before with Innovator Crest, but still pretty good. Anyway, that's about it. I'll see y'all around. Enjoy. Peace.